The morning fog hung thick over the Ardennes forest on December 23, 1944, clinging to the frozen earth like a shroud over the dead. German Panzer commander Hauptmann Klaus Müller sat inside his Panther Ausf G tank, breath clouding in the cramped fighting compartment despite the engine's warmth radiating through the steel hull. His gloved hands rested on the commander's cupola hatch, eyes scanning the tree line through the dawn's gray half-light. The previous 3 days had been a symphony of triumph for the Wehrmacht. Village after village had fallen. American forces had scattered like leaves before the German winter offensive. Müller had seen the fear in their eyes as they retreated, abandoning equipment, fleeing eastward in disarray. His Panther, with its formidable 75mm Caudido K-42 L-70 gun and sloped armor that could deflect most Allied shells, had emerged unscathed from every engagement. The Americans, he had been told repeatedly, possessed no weapon capable of threatening a Panther at distance. Their Sherman tanks were coffins on tracks, their anti-tank guns obsolete relics. The intelligence briefings had been clear and consistent. German armor superiority was absolute. Müller tapped his boot against the turret floor, a nervous habit from months of combat. Around him, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled like distant thunder. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing patches of snow-covered fields between the dense stands of pine and oak. His radio crackled with static, then a voice reporting American movement 3 kilometers to the northeast. Müller ordered his driver forward, the Maybach HL-230 engine growling to life, treads crunching through ice-crusted snow. The Panther rolled from its concealed position among the trees, turret traversing slowly, searching. At 1,200 meters distance, the Americans were effectively invisible to German tankers, who had been trained to engage at ranges of 600 to 800 meters. The doctrine was simple: close the distance, use superior optics and firepower to destroy the enemy before they could respond effectively. This had worked against every Allied tank they had encountered. The Sherman, even the upgunned 76mm version, could not penetrate Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. German tankers had grown confident, perhaps dangerously so. What Klaus Müller did not know, what none of the German armor commanders advancing through the Ardennes understood in those critical winter days of 1944, was that the Americans had quietly deployed a new weapon system that would fundamentally alter the calculus of armored warfare on the Western Front. The M36 tank destroyer, nicknamed the Jackson after Confederate General Stonewall Jackson, had begun arriving in Europe only months earlier, its existence largely unknown to German intelligence. Unlike previous American tank destroyers that mounted 76mm or 3-inch guns, the M36 carried a weapon that changed everything: the 90mm M3 gun, the same weapon mounted on the M26 Pershing heavy tank. This gun could fire an armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round, the M82 shot, with a muzzle velocity of 2,800 feet per second. At 1,000 yards, this projectile could penetrate 190 millimeters of armor plate at 30 degrees from vertical. The Panther's frontal glasses, sloped at 55 degrees and nominally 80 millimeters thick, provided excellent protection against conventional Allied guns. But the effective thickness against the M36's 90mm was a different calculation entirely. And at 1,200 yards, a distance the Germans considered safe, the M36 could engage with lethal precision. The M36 represented more than just a bigger gun mounted on a tracked chassis. It embodied the American approach to industrial warfare: rapid adaptation, overwhelming production capacity, and the willingness to deploy new technology at scale once proven effective. Development had begun in 1943 when American ordnance officers, analyzing combat reports from North Africa and Italy, recognized that German armor was evolving faster than Allied anti-tank capabilities. The standard M10 tank destroyer, with its 3-inch gun, effective against earlier German tanks, struggled against the thick armor of Tigers and Panthers. The M36 program accelerated through 1944, with the first production vehicles rolling off assembly lines in April. By June, as Allied forces landed in Normandy, M36s were being shipped across the Atlantic. By December, as the Germans launched their surprise winter offensive through the Ardennes, several hundred M36s had been distributed among American tank destroyer battalions, quietly taking positions in the forests and towns of Belgium and Luxembourg. The design philosophy behind the M36 reflected hard-learned lessons. Built on a modified M10A1 chassis, itself derived from the M4 Sherman, the Jacksons sacrificed armor protection for firepower and mobility. The turret was open-topped, a vulnerability in close combat, but a necessary compromise to accommodate the massive 90mm gun's recoil mechanism. The armor was thin, maximum 50mm at the front, barely enough to stop small arms fire and shell fragments. This was intentional. American tank destroyer doctrine emphasized ambush tactics, long-range engagement, and rapid repositioning. The M36 was not meant to trade blows with German armor in close quarters brawling. It was a precision instrument, a sniper rifle in vehicle form, designed to engage enemy tanks from concealed positions at ranges where German guns could not effectively respond. The five-man crew, commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver, trained extensively in shoot-and-scoot tactics, firing a few rounds, then immediately relocating. Before German artillery could range their position, American crews who trained on the M36 in late 1944 quickly recognized they had been given a game-changing weapon. Sergeant First Class Michael Wittmann, no relation to the famous German tank ace, commanded an M36 in the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion. In a letter home written in November 1944, shortly before the Ardennes offensive, he described his first live-fire training with the 90mm gun. "The sound alone is enough to make you believe in American industrial might," he wrote. "When that gun fires, the whole vehicle rocks backward. The muzzle blast kicks up a cloud of dust and debris 30 feet in every direction. We put a round through a captured Panzer IV from 1,500 yards, like it was made of tin foil. The boys are calling it the Panther Killer. I believe them." Wittmann's confidence was not misplaced. The M82 armor-piercing round weighed nearly 25 pounds, more than twice the weight of a 76mm Sherman round. The sheer kinetic energy delivered on target was devastating. But technology alone does not win battles. The effectiveness of the M36 depended on tactical employment, crew training, and the ability to exploit the weapon's capabilities under combat conditions. American tank destroyer doctrine, refined through 3 years of war, emphasized decentralization and initiative. Tank destroyer battalions were not permanently attached to infantry or armored divisions, but held in reserve and committed where enemy armor threatened. This allowed flexibility and concentration of force. Commanders at the battalion and company level had significant autonomy to position their vehicles where terrain and intelligence suggested enemy armor would appear. This decentralized approach contrasted sharply with German practice, where armor and anti-tank assets were often rigidly controlled by higher headquarters, reducing tactical flexibility. The Americans, learning from early defeats in North Africa and Italy, had developed a system that rewarded aggressive, intelligent action by junior officers and NCOs. The M36 crews were expected to think, to anticipate enemy movements, to choose positions that maximized their weapons' range advantage while minimizing exposure. On December 22, 1944, as German panzer columns pushed westward through the Ardennes, elements of the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M36s, were ordered to establish defensive positions near the town of Mannheim, a critical crossroads in Belgium. The battalion had arrived from England only 3 weeks earlier, their M36 still bearing factory paint. The crews were experienced, veterans of fighting in France, but this would be their first major engagement with the new vehicles against German heavy armor. Lieutenant James Burt, commanding a platoon of 4 M36s, received orders to cover the northern approach to Mannheim, where intelligence suggested a German armored column would attempt to break through American lines. Burt positioned his vehicles in a tree line overlooking open fields, spacing them 200 yards apart to avoid concentrated fire. camouflaging them with branches and snow-covered canvas. The M36's low profile, lower than a Sherman despite the larger gun, aided concealment. At 600 hours on December 23rd, as the fog began to lift, Bert's crews waited, engines cold to avoid thermal signatures, watching the distant fields through binoculars and gun sights. The German column that approached Mannheim that morning included 12 Panther tanks from the 2nd SS Panzer Division, supported by infantry in half-tracks. Hauptmann Müller's Panther led the formation, advancing cautiously through the morning light. The German tankers had every reason for confidence. For 5 days they had pushed American forces back, encountering little organized resistance, destroying dozens of Sherman tanks and armored vehicles. The Panther's 75mm guns had proven devastatingly effective, and not a single Panther in Müller's company had suffered penetrating damage. As the column emerged from the forest into the open fields south of Mannheim, Müller ordered a tactical halt to survey the terrain ahead. Through his commander's optics, he could see the town in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, no obvious American presence. The fields between his position and the town were perhaps 1,400 meters of gently rolling, snow-covered ground. Standard procedure would be to advance in staggered formation, maintaining intervals, ready to engage any enemy that appeared. Müller gave the order. The Panthers rolled forward, tracks churning through snow, turrets traversing slowly, searching for targets. In the tree line 1,200 yards to the northwest, Lieutenant Bert watched the German formation through binoculars. He counted 12 Panthers, a formidable force, advancing directly into his kill zone. Bert's training kicked in. He spoke calmly into his radio, designating targets for each M36, ordering them to wait until all vehicles were in position to fire simultaneously. The initial volley would be critical. Once the Germans realized they were under fire, they would scatter, seek cover, call for artillery. The Americans had perhaps 30 seconds to inflict maximum damage. Bert's gunner, Corporal Thomas Hayes, laid the 90mm gun on the lead Panther, the commander's tank, Müller's tank. Hayes adjusted for range, wind, the slight incline of the terrain. The M36's gun sight, a sophisticated telescopic system, allowed precise targeting at extended ranges. Hayes centered the reticle on the Panther's turret ring, a vulnerable point where armor was thinner. He reported ready. Around him, 3 other M36 crews reported the same. Bert counted down. 3, 2, 1, fire! The morning erupted in thunder. 4 90mm guns fired within a second of each other, the muzzle blasts lighting up the tree line like lightning strikes. The sound was overwhelming, a physical force that rattled equipment and vibrations through the frozen ground. 25-pound armor-piercing rounds streaked across 1,200 yards in less than 2 seconds, invisible except for the faint distortion in the air. Hauptmann Müller, peering through his commander's optics, scanning for threats, never saw the round that killed him. The M82 shot struck his Panther's turret front at the gun mantlet, a direct hit at extreme range. The projectile, traveling at over 2,000 feet per second even after crossing 1,200 yards, smashed through the 100mm curved mantlet armor with catastrophic force. Inside the turret, the round fragmented, releasing a spray of molten metal and armor spalling that killed Müller and his gunner instantly, ignited ammunition, and caused a secondary explosion that blew the turret's rear hatch open. Flames and black smoke poured from the stricken Panther. Within seconds, 3 other Panthers were hit. 2 penetrated and burning, 1 struck on the glacis plate, the round failing to penetrate but destroying the transmission and immobilizing the vehicle. The surviving German tankers reacted with trained discipline, but also with shock and confusion. They were taking fire from long range, extremely accurate fire from weapons capable of penetrating Panther armor. This was not supposed to be possible. The Americans did not have such weapons. German doctrine called for immediate counterfire and maneuver to close the distance. But the American positions were over a kilometer away, partially concealed in trees, and the Panther's 75mm guns, while powerful, were optimized for 800-meter engagements. Return fire was inaccurate, shells exploding short or wide. The German commanders ordered smoke deployment, attempting to obscure their positions, but this also blinded them, making accurate fire impossible. Meanwhile, the M36s continued firing, methodically engaging targets. The crews reloaded quickly, the M36's semi-automatic breech allowing a sustained rate of fire. Within 3 minutes, 6 Panthers were destroyed or immobilized, burning hulks on the snow-covered field. The remaining German tanks retreated into the forest, abandoning their disabled vehicles, their confidence shattered by an enemy they could not effectively engage. Lieutenant Burt ordered his M36s to displace immediately after ceasing fire. Standard tank destroyer doctrine. Within 10 minutes, all 4 vehicles had moved to alternate positions a kilometer to the south, anticipating German artillery retaliation on their original firing position. That retaliation came 15 minutes later, a barrage of 105mm shells that obliterated the tree line where the M36 had been, but found only empty ground. The Americans had vanished, relocated, ready to engage again from a new position. This was the tactical advantage the M36 provided, the ability to strike decisively at long range, then disappear before the enemy could respond. For the German tankers facing this new threat, it was a profoundly demoralizing experience. The Panther, which had given them a sense of invulnerability, was suddenly vulnerable to an enemy weapon they could not see, could not engage effectively, and could not predict. The engagement near Mannheim on December 23, 1944, was not an isolated incident. Across the Ardennes front, as German armor pressed westward, American M36 tank destroyers were deployed in increasing numbers, and the results were consistently devastating. German after-action reports from late December and early January capture the growing alarm. A report from the 2nd SS Panzer Division dated December 27 notes, "Enemy tank destroyers with heavy guns range over 1,000 meters, capable of penetrating Panther frontal armor." Another report from Panzer Lehr Division on January 3, 1945, describes American long-range anti-tank weapons, possibly 90mm caliber, extremely accurate, high velocity. German intelligence officers struggled to identify the specific weapon system. Some reports speculated the Americans were deploying captured German 88mm guns. Others suggested new British weapons. Few initially recognized that the M36, which had been in service for months, was the culprit. This intelligence failure compounded the tactical problem. German tankers did not know what they were facing, how to identify it, or how to counter it effectively. The psychological impact on German armor crews was profound. For over a year, Panther and Tiger tank crews had operated with a sense of technical superiority. They knew Allied tanks were inferior. They knew Allied anti-tank guns struggled to penetrate their armor at combat ranges. This confidence translated into aggressive tactics, willingness to engage numerically superior forces, and a general belief that superior German engineering would prevail. The appearance of the M36 shattered this confidence. Suddenly, German tankers were vulnerable at ranges where they considered themselves safe. The psychological effect of being engaged by an enemy you cannot see, from a distance beyond your effective range, by a weapon that can destroy your vehicle with a single shot, cannot be overstated. It created hesitation, caution, and fear. German armor commanders began ordering more conservative tactics, shorter advances, more time spent in concealed positions, reluctance to cross open ground. This slowed the tempo of operations, reduced the effectiveness of armor as an offensive weapon, and contributed to the eventual failure of the Ardennes offensive. The effectiveness of the M36's 90mm gun was not merely theoretical or anecdotal. Post-war ballistics testing and analysis of destroyed German tanks provided hard data. At 1,000 yards, the M82 armor-piercing round could penetrate 170mm of homogeneous armor plate at 0 degrees, or 130mm at 30 degrees from vertical. The Panther's frontal glacis, sloped at 55 degrees, provided an effective thickness of approximately 140mm when calculated against projectiles striking at optimal angles. However, The M36's high muzzle velocity meant that at combat ranges, the round's trajectory was relatively flat, often striking at angles less favorable to the sloped armor, reducing its effectiveness. More critically, the Panther's turret front, gun mantlet, and turret ring were vulnerable points where armor was thinner or vertical. A well-aimed shot at these points, even at 1,200 yards, could achieve penetration. American tank destroyer crews were trained to target these weak points, using their superior optics and fire control to place shots, precisely rather than simply firing at the largest target area. The production and deployment of the M36 exemplified American industrial capacity and logistical efficiency. From the decision to develop the vehicle in early 1943 to initial combat deployment in late 1944, the program moved with remarkable speed. Fisher Tank Arsenal, the primary manufacturer, produced the first pilot vehicles in March 1944. After testing and refinement, full-scale production began in June. By the end of 1944, over 1,400 M36 had been manufactured. This rate of production, unmatched by any other combatant nation, allowed the Americans to deploy new weapon systems in significant numbers quickly. For comparison, Germany produced fewer than 500 Panther tanks in the entire second half of 1944, hampered by Allied bombing, resource shortages, and the increasing chaos of a collapsing economy. The United States, operating factories thousands of miles from the front lines, immune to enemy bombardment, with access to virtually unlimited raw materials, could outproduce the Axis powers by orders of magnitude. The M36 was just one example of this overwhelming industrial advantage translated into battlefield effectiveness. The logistical tale required to keep M36s in combat was equally impressive. Each vehicle required ammunition, fuel, spare parts, and maintenance. The 90mm rounds were large and heavy, requiring specialized handling and transport. A single M36 carried 47 rounds of main gun ammunition, a combat load lasting through perhaps 2 or 3 engagements before resupply was necessary. American logistics units moved mountains of supplies forward to keep tank destroyer battalions operational. Ammunition ships crossed the Atlantic, convoys drove through France and Belgium, supply depots stockpiled thousands of rounds at forward positions. This logistical network, vast and complex, ensured that when an M36 crew expended their ammunition in combat, more rounds were available within hours, not days or weeks. German forces, by contrast, were experiencing severe logistical shortages by late 1944. Fuel was scarce, ammunition rationed, spare parts unavailable. Even when German tanks were technically superior, they often sat immobile for lack of fuel or awaiting parts that never arrived. The M36's effectiveness was inseparable from the system that supported it. The crews who operated the M36s came from diverse backgrounds, united by intensive training and a common purpose. Corporal Thomas Hayes, the gunner in Lieutenant Burt's M36 during the Manhay engagement, grew up on a farm in Iowa. Before the war, he had never driven a car, never operated machinery more complex than a tractor. He joined the Army in 1942, was selected for tank destroyer training based on his eyesight and steady hands. The training was rigorous. Months of gunnery practice, learning to estimate ranges, adjust for wind and temperature, identify enemy vehicles by silhouette. Hayes practiced on mock-ups of German tanks, memorizing vulnerable points, optimal angles of engagement. By the time he arrived in Europe in November 1944, he could identify a Panther at 2,000 yards through binoculars and estimate its range within 50 yards by eye alone. This level of training, replicated across thousands of American soldiers, transformed ordinary men into highly effective combat specialists. Hayes's first shot in combat, the round that killed Hauptmann Müller, was the culmination of months of preparation, the translation of training into lethal action. The German tankers facing the M36 were equally well-trained, often more experienced, veterans of years of combat on the eastern and western fronts. But experience and training could not overcome fundamental technological and tactical disadvantages. The Panther's gun sight, while sophisticated by German standards, was less effective at long ranges than the American equivalent. The Panther's commander had access to good optics, but coordinating fire at extended ranges required precise communication between commander and gunner, a process that took time. The M36's crew layout and fire control system allowed faster target acquisition and engagement. More critically, the Germans did not have a doctrine or tactical framework for dealing with an enemy that could engage effectively at 1,200 yards. German armor tactics were built around medium-range engagements, using superior firepower and armor to win close fights. When faced with an enemy that refused to close, that engaged from beyond effective response range, German tactics became obsolete. The open-topped turret of the M36, often criticized as a vulnerability, was in practice less problematic than might be expected. In long-range engagements, the primary threat was armor-piercing rounds, not overhead fire. In close combat, where artillery or infantry could exploit the open turret, M36 crews relied on speed and maneuverability to disengage. Crews improvised field modifications, welding improvised overhead covers from scrap metal, stretching canvas tarps, anything to provide some protection from shell fragments and weather. The open turret did create discomfort in winter conditions. Crews operating in the Ardennes in December and January endured sub-zero temperatures, snow and sleet falling directly into the fighting compartment. Frostbite was common. Soldiers wore every piece of clothing they could layer, wrapped themselves in blankets, huddled close to the gun's recoil mechanism for warmth. Despite the hardship, morale remained high. The crews knew they had a weapon that could kill German heavy armor, something that had been rare in American service until the M36's arrival. As January 1945 progressed and the Ardennes offensive ground to a halt, the Germans were forced to retreat under pressure from American counterattacks. The M36 played a critical role in these operations. As German armor attempted to withdraw, covering retreating infantry, American tank destroyer battalions harassed them, engaging from long range, forcing the Germans to detour, expend fuel, abandon damaged vehicles. The slow German retreat turned into a rout in several sectors, as American armor and infantry, supported by M36s providing overwatch and long-range fire, encircled and destroyed entire German units. In the forests and hills of the Ardennes, the tactical advantage shifted decisively to the Americans. The M36, combined with increasing Allied air superiority, overwhelming artillery support, and superior logistics, made any German armored counterattack prohibitively costly. By February 1945, as Allied forces regrouped to launch offensives into Germany itself, the M36 had become a standard part of American armored formations. Tank destroyer battalions equipped with M36s were in high demand, attached to every major offensive operation. The 90mm gun proved equally effective against German fortifications, bunkers, and defensive positions. High explosive rounds could demolish buildings and suppress enemy infantry. The M36 evolved from a specialized tank destroyer into a general-purpose fire support vehicle, flexible and deadly in various combat roles. This adaptability reflected the American approach to military equipment, designed for a specific purpose, but built in versatility and adaptability to changing battlefield conditions. German responses to the M36 threat were limited by resources and time. In January 1945, German engineers proposed modifications to Panther armor to increase protection against 90mm rounds, including thicker turret fronts and additional spaced armor. None of these proposals could be implemented at scale before the war's end. Production of new Panthers declined precipitously in early 1945 as Allied bombing destroyed factories and raw material shortages became critical. The Germans also attempted tactical countermeasures, emphasizing ambush tactics, close-range engagements, and infantry armor coordination to negate the M36's range advantage. These tactics required training, coordination, and resources that were increasingly unavailable. The German Army of 1945 was a shadow of its 1944 self, depleted by casualties, undermanned, poorly supplied. Its veteran units burned out, replaced by undertrained recruits and overage conscripts. Tactical excellence could not compensate for systemic collapse. The symbolic significance of the M36 extended beyond its battlefield effectiveness. For American soldiers, the vehicle represented technological superiority and industrial might, the ability of American factories to produce weapons that could match or exceed anything the enemy fielded. This was psychologically important. In the early years of the war, American soldiers had often faced German equipment that was qualitatively superior. The German 88mm gun, the Tiger tank, the Panther, all were feared weapons that outmatched American equivalents. The arrival of the M36, capable of destroying German heavy armor at long range, shifted this perception. American soldiers gained confidence that their equipment was not only adequate, but superior. This confidence translated into more aggressive tactics, higher morale, and a belief in inevitable victory. The M36 was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of America's ability to learn, adapt, and outproduce any enemy. For German soldiers, the M36 represented the opposite, the realization that technological superiority had slipped away, that Allied industrial capacity was overwhelming, that the war was lost. Every disabled Panther, every burning Tiger destroyed by a weapon its crew never saw, reinforced the futility of continued resistance. German soldiers, especially tankers, were among the most fanatical and committed in the Wehrmacht, believers in German military excellence and technological superiority. The systematic destruction of their armor by American weapons shattered this belief structure. By spring 1945, German morale was collapsing across all fronts. Units surrendered en masse. Officers abandoned their posts. Soldiers deserted. The failure of German armor in the Ardennes, due in no small part to the effectiveness of weapons like the M36, was a critical psychological blow from which the Wehrmacht never recovered. The M36's legacy extended into the post-war period. Many M36s remained in American service into the 1950s, serving in the Korean War, where they again proved effective against North Korean and Chinese armor. The 90mm gun became the standard main armament for American medium tanks in the late 1940s, equipping the M26 Pershing and later the M46 Patton. The principles demonstrated by the M36, long-range precision fire from mobile platforms, influenced tank destroyer and anti-tank doctrine for decades. The vehicle itself, while obsolete by the 1960s, remained in service with Allied nations through the Cold War, a testament to its robust design and battlefield effectiveness. Examples of the M36 are preserved in military museums worldwide, silent witnesses to the technological and industrial warfare of the mid-20th century. The story of the M36 and the German tankers who encountered. It is not merely a tale of superior technology defeating inferior technology. It is a story about adaptation, about industrial capacity, about the willingness to innovate and deploy new systems rapidly in response to battlefield realities. The Americans recognized a problem: German heavy armor outmatching existing Allied anti-tank weapons, and solved it through engineering and mass production. The Germans, conversely, failed to adapt, constrained by resources, ideology, and the mounting chaos of a losing war. The M36 succeeded not because it was a wonder weapon, but because it was a good weapon produced in large numbers, deployed effectively, supported logistically, and operated by trained crews within a sound tactical doctrine. These elements, combined, created battlefield dominance. The frozen fields of the Ardennes in December 1944 witnessed the collision of two military philosophies. The German approach, emphasizing qualitative superiority, technical excellence, and the skill of individual soldiers and small units, had proven devastatingly effective in the war's early years. But by 1944, this approach was failing against the Allied strategy of quantitative superiority, overwhelming industrial production, and systematic application of technological advantages. The M36 was one weapon among many that illustrated this shift. Every time a German Panther burned on a distant hillside, struck by a round fired from over 1,000 yards by an American tank destroyer its crew never saw, The obsolescence of the German approach was demonstrated. The Wehrmacht was fighting a 20th-century industrial war with 19th-century concepts of military excellence. For the individual soldiers on both sides, these grand strategic considerations were abstract. What mattered was survival, completing the mission, returning home. Corporal Hayes, the Iowa farm boy turned M36 gunner, fired dozens of rounds in combat between December 1944 and May 1945. He destroyed 4 confirmed German tanks, contributed to the destruction of several more, supported infantry attacks, and survived multiple close calls with German artillery and infantry. After the war, he returned to Iowa, resumed farming, rarely spoke of his experiences. In a brief oral history interview conducted in the 1980s, he reflected on his time in the M36. "It was a good vehicle," he said simply. "It did what we needed it to do. The gun was powerful, accurate. We trusted it. That matters when you're in combat." This understated pragmatism characterized the American soldiers' relationship with their equipment. The M36 was not glorified or mythologized. It was a tool, effective and reliable, that helped win a war. The German tankers who faced the M36 and survived carried different memories. Those who surrendered in 1945 and spent years in POW camps, or who returned to a devastated Germany, often struggled to reconcile their wartime experiences with the reality of total defeat. The technological superiority they had believed in, the quality of their training and equipment, had not been enough. Interviews with German Panther veterans conducted decades after the war reveal a mix of pride in their service, recognition of Allied material superiority, and lingering questions about how the war was lost. One former Panther commander, interviewed in the 1990s, recalled the first time his unit encountered M36s in January 1945. "We thought we were safe at that distance," he said. "We had engaged American Shermans dozens of times and always prevailed. When the first Panther exploded, we did not understand what had happened. We thought perhaps a lucky shot from a distant gun. Then a second Panther, then a third. We realized we were facing something new, something dangerous. The confidence we had felt disappeared. We became cautious, afraid. That was the beginning of the end for us. The fields where these engagements occurred are peaceful now. Return to agriculture, forests regrown, the scars of war largely erased by time." Near Mannheim, Belgium, a small memorial marks the fighting that took place in December 1944 and January 1945. Tourists visit occasionally, walk the ground, try to imagine the sounds and fury of battle. The exact spot where Lieutenant Bert's M36 platoon engaged the German Panther column is now a stand of mature trees, indistinguishable from the surrounding forest. No marker indicates what happened there. The frozen field where Hauptmann Müller's Panther burned is plowed land, growing wheat and barley. No trace of the violence that occurred 70 years ago. This erasure is natural, inevitable, and in some ways tragic. The specific details of individual battles fade, remembered only in official records and aging veterans' memories, eventually lost entirely as the last witnesses pass away. But the broader truths remain. The M36 and its 90mm gun represented a moment when American industrial power, technological innovation, and tactical evolution combined to create a weapon system that fundamentally altered the balance of armored warfare on the Western Front. It demonstrated that even late in a war, new weapons could have decisive impact if deployed in sufficient numbers with proper doctrine and training. It showed that technological advantages are temporary, always subject to countermeasures and innovations by the enemy, requiring constant adaptation and improvement. It proved that wars are won not by individual weapons, but by systems, production, logistics, training, doctrine, morale, all working together toward a common goal. The German tankers, who never knew the M36 could pierce their Panthers at 1,200 yards, learned this truth in the most visceral way possible, through shock, defeat, and the destruction of their vehicles and comrades. For many, this knowledge came too late, in the final seconds before an armor-piercing round ended their lives. For the survivors, It was a lesson in the limits of individual courage and skill against systemic superiority. The Americans, for their part, learned that investing in innovation, maintaining industrial capacity, and adapting quickly to battlefield realities provided decisive advantages that no amount of enemy bravery could overcome. In the broader narrative of World War II, the M36 is a footnote, one weapon among thousands, its contribution to victory difficult to quantify precisely. Yet for the soldiers who crewed it, and for the German tankers who faced it, the vehicle was immensely significant, a direct determinant of life and death, victory and defeat. This is the essential paradox of military history. What seems trivial in the grand strategic view is often everything to those who experienced it. The M36 did not win the war alone. No single weapon did. But it contributed, materially and psychologically, to the Allied victory in Northwest Europe. It represented American industrial strength, the capacity to identify problems and solve them through engineering and production. It symbolized the shift in technological advantage from the Axis to the Allies that characterized the war's later years. The thunder of the 90mm gun, the flash of muzzle blast in a winter dawn, the long arc of a projectile crossing 1,200 yards to strike an unsuspecting target. These are images that capture a moment in military history when firepower, range, and precision combined to create tactical dominance. For the American crews, each shot was a calculation, a test of training and skill, a moment of controlled violence in service of a larger cause. For the German targets, the impact was catastrophic, sudden, incomprehensible death or injury arriving from beyond visual range. From an enemy they could not fight. This asymmetry defined the battles of late 1944 and early 1945 in Northwest Europe. The Germans fought with courage and skill, but increasingly with obsolete doctrine and insufficient resources. The Americans fought with overwhelming material advantage, improving equipment, and systematic application of lessons learned. The outcome was never in doubt once the industrial and technological balance shifted irreversibly. The M36 Jackson, with its distinctive open-topped turret, sloped hull, and massive 90mm gun, remains a powerful symbol of American armored warfare in World War II. It was not the most produced American armored vehicle, nor the most famous, nor perhaps even the most effective in all situations. But in its specific role, as a long-range tank destroyer capable of engaging and defeating German heavy armor at distances those armor crews considered safe, it was supremely successful. It fulfilled its design purpose and exceeded expectations. It gave American forces a tactical capability they had lacked, changing the dynamics of armored combat. It contributed to victory in measurable and significant ways. The men who designed, built, transported, maintained, and fought in M36s were ordinary Americans, drawn from farms and cities, factories and universities, united by a common purpose in a global conflict. They applied American industrial methods, engineering expertise, and democratic values to the problem of defeating fascism. The M36 was one result of this effort, a machine born of necessity, refined through testing, produced in quantity, and deployed with devastating effectiveness. It represented the best of American wartime innovation, pragmatic, adaptable, focused on results rather than elegance, and backed by the world's most powerful industrial economy. For the German soldiers who faced the M36, the experience was a confrontation with the reality of total war in the industrial age. Individual bravery, tactical skill, and superior training could not overcome systemic disadvantages in production, logistics, and technology. The Panther tank, once a symbol of German armored superiority, became a vulnerable target when faced with weapons specifically designed to defeat it, produced in numbers Germany could not match, and employed by an enemy with unlimited resources and unflinching determination. The confidence German tankers felt in their vehicles, earned through years of victories, evaporated in the face of American 90mm guns, engaging from ranges they thought impossible. This psychological shift, replicated across countless engagements and battlefields, contributed to the collapse of German resistance in the war's final months. The legacy of the M36 is not found in monuments or memorials, though a few exist. It is found in the principles it demonstrated: that innovation matters, that production capacity wins wars, that adapting to battlefield realities faster than the enemy provides decisive advantage, and that technology, properly employed, can multiply the effectiveness of trained soldiers. These lessons, learned at great cost in the forests and fields of Europe, shaped American military doctrine for generations. The M36 was a teacher, its lessons written in smoke and steel, in the wreckage of German tanks, and the survival of American crews. Those lessons remain relevant, studied in military academies, analyzed in historical texts, and remembered by those who understand that victory in war is not inevitable but earned through superior preparation, resources, and the will to prevail. As the winter sun set over the Ardennes on that December evening in 1944, after the guns had fallen silent and the smoke had cleared, American tank destroyer crews performed maintenance on their M36s, cleaning the barrels, restocking ammunition, preparing for the next day's battles. German survivors, those who had escaped the burning hulks of their Panthers, retreated into the forest, shaken and demoralized, carrying wounded comrades, reporting their losses to commanders who could offer no solution, no weapon to counter the American advantage. In this daily routine of preparation and withdrawal, victory and defeat, the outcome of the war was being written. The M36, with its 90mm gun and the skilled crews who operated it, was one pen writing that outcome, one instrument among many in the vast orchestra of industrial warfare that characterized World War II, the story of German tankers who never knew American M36 tank. Destroyers could pierce. Their Panthers at 1,200 yards is ultimately a story about the fog of war, about intelligence failures, about technological surprise, and about the human cost of miscalculation. It is about young men on both sides, thrust into mechanized combat, operating complex weapon systems, making split-second decisions that determined life and death. It is about the intersection of human skill and technological capability, and how that intersection shaped the course of history. The M36 was machinery, steel and gunpowder, optics and ammunition, but in the hands of trained crews, it became something more, an instrument of American military power, a symbol of industrial might, and a weapon that helped win the most destructive conflict in human history. That is its legacy, earned in the frozen fields of Europe, preserved in the memory of those who fought, and studied by those who seek to understand how wars are won and lost.